Hello, and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's show, I'm talking to Suhaiymah Manzoor-Khan about her latest book, Seeing for Ourselves and Even Stranger Possibilities. Suhaiymah is one of the most thoughtful, introspective and intelligent people I know, and I absolutely love all the work that she does and everything she puts out into the world. I feel like we have so much to learn from her. Seeing for Ourselves feels quite different to Suhaiymah's other books. This is a little bit more personal, more reflective, and it offers some real personal reflections on identity, faith, belonging, the Western gaze, grief, love, and activism. In her book, Suhaiymah encourages us to move beyond the white Western gaze and focus on the only gaze that matters, that of God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's such a powerful little book, forcing us to rethink our values, ideas, and intentions, and encouraging us to embrace our true, authentic selves away from the gazes upon us. Suhaiymah Manzoor-Khan is a writer, poet, and educator, disrupting understandings of history, race, knowledge, and violence. She works to equip herself and others with the tools and faith to resist the unlivable conditions we find ourselves in and work towards another reality. Her latest book, Seeing for Ourselves, came out with Harder Press in September 2023. Harder Press is a really great indie publisher working to put out books that really matter. Prior to this, Suhaiymah authored Tangled in Terror, Uprooting Islamophobia, which was widely endorsed by the likes of Loki, Muazzam Beg, Fatma Manji, Lola Olufemi, and others. She was also on this show talking about that book back in 2022. I'm so glad that she's my guest today. Before we go on with today's episode with Suhaiymah, I'm just going to tell you about the sponsors of this episode. Now, I know when it comes to giving charity, it can feel a little overwhelming. There are so many charities to choose from, all seemingly doing amazing work. So who can you trust? For this episode, I've teamed up with Muslim Charity, a UK-based international charity inspired by Islamic values, who have been serving and uplifting needy and vulnerable communities since 1999. Muslim Charity are focused on empowerment and creating opportunities for those in need, giving them the skills and resources to thrive, to create livelihoods, tackle hunger and thirst, and break cycles of poverty. They work with honesty and transparency, reaching some of the world's most impoverished and remote locations, providing food, water, orphan care, education, and healthcare. They are swift and thorough during emergencies and disasters and stay behind long after, rebuilding communities. If you're looking for a charity you can trust, especially when it comes to your zakat and sadaqah, Muslim Charity is the one for you. Visit muslimcharity.org.uk/Samia to check out some of my favourite impactful projects. That's muslimcharity.org.uk/Samia, SAMIA. Now, on with the show. Suhaiymah, assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the Diverse Bookshelf podcast. I'm so glad to have you back on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really, really pleased to be back. You've just let me know that I came on your second episode, and now we're like 60 plus episodes later. I'm delighted, and just very grateful that you'd want me back.
Oh no, honestly, you are, as you said, you were my second guest, and I loved recording that episode with you. I've loved to continue seeing the work that you're doing, and cannot wait to talk about your latest book, which is Seeing for Ourselves. But before we get into the show, how are you doing? How are you?
Alhamdulillah. I think as everyone at this time, I'm sure it's very uncanny to just be continuing with things like making our podcast and doing our life and having our breakfast whilst there's a active genocide happening. That's just like unceasing, and I think I feel a little bit insane sometimes. I think this is a shared feeling, but like you just it's really, really difficult, I think, to just know what to do with yourself when you're like witnessing all of this. I feel like I'm so well, like alhamdulillah, and I think actually in many ways it magnifies the blessings that we have in our day-to-day life. But at the same time, yeah, just feeling completely like, oh my gosh, there's so much happening, but also so much clarity, I think, around themes spoken about in the past, and I know themes that you're interested in, but like, yeah, like it really is clearer than ever before that what the world order we live in is and who it benefits. So yeah, alhamdulillah. But with many caveats. Yeah. How about you?
I'm okay. I think I share basically everything that you've said in terms of how I am and how I have been over the last few months. I think more than ever it is so clear, you know, the ideas around whose lives matter more and language being used and who makes the decisions and where power lies and what really influences people and decision makers to make certain decisions, because it completely blows my mind that this genocide has been going on for over 4 months and there's still no sign of a permanent ceasefire. And I just can't fathom, like I just can't
Yeah.
understand like what is actually happening with that. And like I just I think
I think even the fact that we've had to reduce the conversation to this ceasefire, no ceasefire, it's like that isn't even the thing that we want. Like we just,
exactly
we don't want people to ever have to face colonial occupation. We don't like it, and I think that's what's also difficult is like how do we get the actual outcome rather than just this very like it's like, oh, you've been murdering people for all this time. A ceasefire is like it's the it's like that's not even that shouldn't even be a thing that like we have to be happy about, which
exactly
we've been so forced into such a
exactly it's just yeah I I feel, and I've seen you, like you said fairly recently in one of your posts that your words dried up a few months ago, and I really feel that. I feel like although we're trying to talk about it more, and we need to talk about it because we're not getting any closer even to a ceasefire, which, as you said, is the very beginning of what we actually need. But there are so few words that we have access to even describe. And also I feel like we've been saying the same things, like what we are saying is not actually different for what we've been saying for years.
And I think there's like two, because I think I definitely feel that so much, but then I'm also remind myself that the reason to speak isn't always necessarily for the sake of it leading to something. Like a friend of mine actually was friends with the guy who's the head of like the Gazan Poetry Society or something like that, a poetry collective in Gaza. And she asked him lately, like, what's something you would want to share with everybody? And he said, I just want to tell everyone, don't stop talking about it. Don't stop talking about it. And I think when you think of it from that perspective as well, it's like, of course, like I get why we cannot stop talking about this. And but yeah, and I know you're not. I think it's like more like what do we say at this stage? Like we've said everything, haven't we? So I totally get it, but yeah, and I guess also for the historical record, right? Like sometimes it's just that thing of let it not be said that no one said anything. And alhamdulillah, I don't think that could ever be said. Like the whole world is literally, I think the people are against this, but the states and the governments and the financial interests.
Yeah, I think actually that is one of the most heartbreaking things is when I see on social media some of the people from Gaza saying things like, just make this stop, why is the world not doing anything? And I feel like, but the people are trying, like the people are, if the people could do it, the people I'm sure would have stopped it by now. And
which
the heart
massive questions about what power is then, what
exactly
democracy means.
Exactly, like such a harsh and like just a ridiculous reality that power lies in the hands of maybe like 5 men. That's basically what it is. And we know the different things that motivate them are not, unfortunately, what the people want.
Yeah, certainly not. Yeah.
Exactly. Here we are. But your book, Seeing for Ourselves, is very. I mean, I was really moved by it, and I have reread sections of it again. Like I just think it's so beautiful and so timely, but also so timeless. But I can't help but notice that I think this is one of your most personal forms of writing.
Very,
And
very.
I mean, you're a poet, you're a creative, and so there is always personal in your writing, always, because it's done from within you. But I feel like generally your work has like a purpose, a political purpose, or you're writing essays or wherever it might be. But this is very personal.
Very
Like, you
vulnerable.
share some of your deepest thoughts, you share some of your stories about people that you know and people that you love and have loved, and that I haven't really seen from you very much at all. And I mean, I want to commend you for that, actually, because I feel like that's very brave, especially if that's not what you've always
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
To
yeah.
now be like, you know what, I'm going to go from kind of somewhat academic lens and be a bit more personal. That I feel like is huge.
Thank you.
But what
Why?
was
Why
that
do
like?
that?
What was that like, and what kind of pushed you to be like, you know what, this book is what this requires of me, and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. I think so at the time that so this book is published with Hydro Press, who are really brilliant in the sense that they're really cross genre. So
Mm.
you can kind of write any form you want. And so at the time that they approached me, I had written my previous book, which was a very prose. It's Tangled in Terror. It's an
Mm.
analysis of Islamophobia. It's very historical, kind of evidence based, analyzing the world. And I think whilst felt really important as a project, it definitely, in some ways, whole of it was quite heavy personally, in the sense that you're learning and you're taking in all these things about Islamophobia, but then you're living in this Muslim body and you are living with all the repercussions of that. And I think in that project, the chapter that I had most enjoyed was one where I was looking in particular at the impact of Islamophobia on Muslims as Muslim. And what I mean by that and what I meant by that was, as people who actually believe there is a God and we actually act based on what that God has decreed and we follow the messenger sent by that God, what does it mean to then live in a world where that knowledge is not only criminalized but actually just deemed illegitimate and just not seen? And
Mm.
I think the reason I kind of had to turn inward for this book, and wanted to, was because I, I guess two reasons. One is that I really and truly believe that from poetry, it's a lesson I've learned, that people are most motivated by stories. Like, we
Mm.
are storytelling beings, and I think God tells us that by sharing so many stories throughout the traditions of the Quran, with all the
Mm.
different revelations that have come. It really, we're people who respond to stories, and so I think there was something about knowing that if I went more inwards, it actually could have a more impactful, resonant consequence for a reader than when you just share something that's quite analytical, where I think a reader can go, oh, that's wow, fascinating, but not feel that, oh my gosh, this must move me too. So there was that. And then I think also, like I say, because of the wanting to explore, like, what does it do to the psyche to kind of live in these conditions, I kind of had to go inwards. But I think the final reason really was that this book, to my poetry collection, Tangled in Terror, didn't need to be written necessarily. Like, it wasn't something like, I think the poetry collection, it was kind of like, okay, well, you have all these poems, you may as well put them together. Tangled in Terror, I felt like there wasn't an accessible book about Islamophobia, so we may as well write that. But this book was like, you don't need to write it, so then what's the purpose? And as you'll know if you've read it, I get very caught up in the intentions behind the book, like, why have I written it? But I think therefore it forced me to also go inwards, because it was like, I suppose it was like, there's only something worth sharing if it's also a lesson for yourself. And this is something that my teachers have often said to me, is that when you speak first and foremost to yourself, right? And we see that
Mm.
amongst, like, the tradition of Islam, that really you're the first person who needs to gain something from what it is that you're thinking. And so I think all of those things forced me to kind of just reflect. And also I think it was actually just nice to be able to kind of use own experiences as the knowledge basis for the kind of conclusions that I was coming to. And in fact, not even treat it as that. I think I was trying to get away from that Western methodology of like, here's an experience and here's what I extract from it. But yeah, I guess at the end of the day, the thing that I'm an expert in and the thing that I have the most experience of is my own life and is my own self. And so it became a really obvious point to work from, to figure out these other themes that I'm trying to think through around being seen and not seen.
Mm. That's really, I mean, just really insightful hearing you reflect on that. And actually, like, a book about being seen and unseen. I guess it can't really be anything other than personal, because it's about you being seen and unseen, and therefore us being unseen and unseen. It's not just about a group of people. And I think, there's been a lot of, and you even mentioned this, there's been a lot of commentary just about, the sort of the gaze, the Western gaze, and the way in which we are objectified. But what you do is you kind of pull us towards thinking about the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see Allah and the sight of God, and also just how limited our sight is, and what would happen if we could just see, Allah's, because we could see what Allah sees and what Allah plans and what Allah does, if we could really allow ourselves to understand that every single thing that happens and every single thing that is has been put together by Allah with the most intricate of planning that we can't even fathom. Like, we can't even understand, if Allah knows every leaf that falls, but there is a meaning and an entire system, an entire like complex web of ecosystems and seasons behind that. But all we see is the single leaf falling, and all we understand is, okay, autumn is here, or we're transitioning into winter, like whatever it is. We have like such a minute and such a limited way of understanding that, and thinking like, but we understand our world. Like, it's so huge. But we talk about this idea of seeing from the eyes, but also seeing from the heart. And I just wondered if you could reflect on that, because you write about how, everybody that looks upon us or looks upon a person in some ways objectifies that. And, as Muslim women especially, and people of colour and Black people, minority communities the world over are, looked at upon a certain way, and there are implications of that. People come with sight, with prejudice already, and stereotypes and agenda. But you say, and you remind us, that it is only, Allah's sight that doesn't include all of those things, that almost like transcends that, because it's so powerful and it's so sacred. And actually, if we think about it in those terms, then we can think about who we are on our own terms, and not by the the powers of those that look upon us, and even that we even look upon ourselves. But I wondered if you could reflect on that, because it's such an important.
Well, I think what kind of happened in the process of writing the book was that initially I realized I wanted to write about just being, all my life I've kind of written, even the analyses that I've done that are quite like critical, there's still kind of a level at which I'm seeing myself through the eyes of a white voyeur, and I'm kind of even, and I think about it in so many different ways. Even recently I was sort of thinking about even my whole identity to some degree is arguably just a response to whiteness, in the sense that, why did I ever learn to speak in the way that I speak? Why did I ever learn to dress in the way that I dress? Why did I ever all of these things? So I suppose when I began writing that book, I realized also this is something that has, like you said, it's been done to a large extent. Frantz Fanon and W.E.B. Du Bois, like these are all theories that aren't new in terms of double consciousness, that I know that I'm being seen by another, and I'm seeing them seeing me, and I'm seeing myself. But what I kind of found was that I got a bit bored. I was kind of just like, what? Where is this going? And I also felt like there's an irony here that I'm banging on still about whiteness. I'm banging on still about this white gaze. And I've said, and I've purported by being a Muslim, that the most important in my life is God's. In reality, in the work I do, in the writing I do, is that true? And so then I think it became a kind of thing of like, what would it mean to write this book? And eventually what I was trying to get to was like, actually, it doesn't even matter what people think of this book, because the really only reception I should worry about is the fact that, and writing is quite a heavy responsibility, in the sense that you're a key thing to do, right? Because you're putting down a something that's going to last, and on the day of judgment, you'll be accountable for these words that you put out there. You can't really take them back if in publishing industries, what I mean? You have said them. And so I started to think more about that. And I think also just, everything you were saying about God's all-encompassing gaze, and how it's incomparable to kind of, how we see and what we see. I think what I also became or was curious about was like, was to is that reality of God's gaze also would free me up from that preoccupation with being seen. Because I think a lot of my life and a lot of my work, and I think maybe it's true for a lot of us, and particularly people in a diasporic context or in under the gaze of whiteness, we really just want, like, at some level, we just want to be seen, like, for who we are, for who we really are, right? And so I think, sometimes the debates that we have around whether a TV show depicts us correctly is really a debate about whether I'm being seen for who I really am. And it's like, some people will say, well, yeah, because, she was flawed and she did it. And someone else is going to feel like, well, no, that was too exposing because we let that character be seen all flawed, but that means that they're going to think we're all flawed. And there's so much anxiety and vulnerability around that. And so my thing was kind of like, what if I knew that my creative sees me already? I just deferred all sight to, rather than being preoccupied with, because even that subtitle, but even stranger possibilities, I even kind of was like, to see myself on my own terms is to kind of presume that that's the best outcome, that my terms are the most important terms, and that I am like, the superior, I don't know, my sight is the superior sight, when in reality, from God, that he understands all, he's the all-knowing, he's the all-seeing. And so I was just curious about what that would allow me to imagine, because a lot of my work to this point, and a lot of the conversations I end up having and questions people ask me often are around imagining, right? Like, what can we imagine for ourselves? What can we imagine for our futures? Like, how can we imagine a different world? And so for me, it was like, what if I'm not, what if I'm not the best person to answer that? What if God actually is the knower of all possibilities, right? Like, what is, what could be, what has been. And so I think that it was the book is just like an exploration and a kind of endeavor to contend with that. And I'm really, I guess, at some level, what I'm really thinking about is, what does it mean to treat an Islamic epistemology, an Islamic way of knowing, really seriously? And we know as Muslims, like, one of the fundamentals of our faith is that you believe in the unseen, you believe in things you cannot see. So if we took that as a serious form of knowledge, which, by the way, is antithetical to kind of Western scientific epistemology, which is that only what is observable is real, and or only, what is empirically noticeable. I feel the wind against my skin, I smell this thing. All of those things are the only things that are real. What that means then for how we might imagine different realities is huge, in the fact that if we believe in the unseen fully, we believe in it. We know there's angels. Every handspan there's angels. We know that God is all seeing. We know that there's 2 recording angels here for me, there's 2 for you. We know that there's a kitab that we have. We know that when we sleep, we're entering the realm in which also, the souls of the dead are in. All of these things, if we take that really seriously, what does it allow us to imagine? And I think actually a really good kind of to think about this is now that, in this moment of genocide, we have certain strategies, we have direct actions, we have protests, we have all of these things, but to some extent we are seeing the limitations of that. Like, within a democracy, it's not democratic, we're not heard, our voice doesn't mean much, our witnessing doesn't mean much, our doing doesn't mean much. So I think it is a really important moment to think about, well, what has Allah already long before told us about how the world works, and how could that inform our strategies? And, I talk about the fact that we genuinely and sincerely believe that hosts of angels helped a party of Muslims win a battle against the Quraysh at Badr. So what does it mean to believe that? Like, how could that inform how we're seeing the world now and how we're seeing ourselves? So it's not just, I think one thing I didn't want the book to be is like a bit too self-indulgent, right? Because I think it's personal, but I think there's a point at which it can just become a bit self-indulgent, that you're just reflecting on your own self, and that can be very nafsi as well, I suppose. And I think writing a book is a nafsi endeavor, but I think what I'm trying to do with this is like really invite people to, if we did Islam as seriously as we purport to, and perhaps, inshallah, other readers are more brave than me and do that. But I think for myself, it was like, if you were to treat Islam as seriously as you say that you do, then you wouldn't be the end of the world, for example, when the Western powers, even the Muslim states, don't come to the aid of Palestinians, because you know and you believe in something much greater, and you also believe that they are not the ones that dictate what happens. They're not the seers of what happens. Even our perception of what is good and bad is not necessarily real. Right? And so even when we hear the way that sometimes the Palestinians talk about their martyrs and they talk about their dead, and you kind of understand that actually they have a different perception of what's good and bad, that they understand that death is not the worst thing that can happen under genocide. Actually, there are far worse ways that you can be undignified or brutalized by human beings. And so all of these things, I think it just asked, for me, it was like, flip my understanding, flip it again, ask another question. And I suppose the thing about the book is that I don't necessarily offer conclusions, but that's also a kind of trying to draw on an Islamic epistemology, right? That in terms of, I'm not someone to give you conclusions. I'm not a learned person. I am not a scholar. I am, far from being the Muslim I would want to be. And so instead, it kind of was like, what I can offer is just, this is the journey I've been on, and I believe others have been on a similar journey, just because we've grown up in a secular Western context. And so I hope, inshallah, by offering those questions, it also might allow someone else to go, do you know what? Oh my God, I've also been beholden, even thought I wasn't being beholden to this white gaze. And subhanAllah, what would happen if actually, I did exalt Allah in the way that when I say subhanAllah, I say I'm exalting Allah.
Yeah. No, I really love it, because I think, growing up in the West as a Muslim, and then like as a visible Muslim as well, I feel like we have an obsession on some level as to how we are viewed.
Yep.
Although we complain all the time about being made into, the palatable, the good immigrant, but we are also, in some ways, we're seeking that, and we're searching for it, and we are falling into that trap, or that, I don't know, just that system.
Yeah.
And how liberating would it be just to free ourselves of it and say, you know what, actually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter. Although, yeah, there may be policy issues, and there may be, some negative outcomes, but actually in me, it doesn't matter if the Western gaze looks at me as oppressed, because I know I'm not oppressed, and I know that Allah knows I'm not oppressed, because I'm not being oppressed by my faith. And just to really hold on to that, and to really lean into that, I think it is so liberating just to even think about being able to do it, let alone actually being able to do it. Because being able to do it is, I don't think is that easy, because of how rooted we are in this world, and how much we feel like it matters because of our attention, or our connection to the dunya.
Yeah.
If I'm not perceived as being nice,
exactly,
I may be turned down from a job, I may lose money, my neighbors won't like me, and that kind of like real everyday impact. And I think it's it's not something that can be done overnight, but I think it's so empowering and so liberating to just even just to think about it, that like if I remind myself on some level, even if I'm not able to do it, if I just remind myself that, you know what, Samia, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What matters is God, and my connection to God, and the fact that like there is freedom within that. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about on this actually is that, like, we know that in Islamic tradition, and you write about it in the book as well, that actually God doesn't want us to be show-offy, right? He doesn't want us to, the good deeds that are rewarded the most are those that are done in private, the prayers that are made in the middle of the night in our homes, the charity that is given that nobody else knows about. Like, those are the things that are most beloved to God. And if we are true to ourselves and true to our faith, those are the things that we should be striving to do more of. But what the world celebrates and what the world rewards is external good deeds or external achievements. It's giving charity publicly, it's going to the mosque and making noise about it. But it also kind of goes with this whole thing that if we want to, if we should be more sort of like unseen, or actions should be unseen. But being Muslim in the West, we are so visibly Muslim. We are always seen. The attention is always on us. And I just wondered what your kind of thoughts are about how do we navigate that? Like, it's like there's two things that are just at opposite, and they're just at odds all the time.
And I think this is why that, like, I'm really glad you've laid it out like that, because I think that is precisely where my kind of fixation comes from, is that my whole life has kind of been about being so visible, what you do in response to that, and again, building your identity in response to being so visible. But then, and I think also, like, on top of what you've said, there's also this element that we're living in a society and a kind of moment where freedom is also equated with visibility, right? So like, if you're only, really justice is framed as, if you are seen in a position of power, or you're seen at the table, that means you've attained justice. E.g., now that you have a brown prime minister, that gives you justice because you're visible in a position of power. And we see that in all sorts of ways, that like, the fashion industry is becoming more fair once we're more visible in it. And so I think there's also something that does to our psyches, where it's like we begin to internalize that my visibility at somewhere is also equates to me being more free or having more less injustice. And so I think you're right, there's a really, really difficult thing to navigate here, because on the one hand, yeah, we're being told by God that, and really, why be unseen? Because it's about sincerity, right? And I think for me, when I explore these ideas and think about them, it's really exciting, because I would say, like, hand on heart, for me, quite candidly, it's very difficult to be fully sincere when you're visible. And I think the more visible you are, the more, if you have a public platform, and, as your podcast grows, or as your Instagram following grows, whatever, I think, and, inshallah, that's not the case for others, but I think for me, there is a question of sincerity, just because how can you retain your absolute trueness when you're so aware of other people's perceptions? And I think that's what is an interesting question for me. And one of the stories that really inspires me, and speaks to the theme that you were just talking about, like, why this is so exciting, is really that story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he's told by the Quraysh that, oh, your friend is alleging that he went to Jerusalem last night, over one night, and this is a journey that they knew takes days and days on camel. And radiallahu anhu doesn't even quite and I really, really can't ever get over this, but the fact that all it is did he say it? That's his first question. Did he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say it? Because that is the barometer of, if he did, and then he goes on to say, if he said it, then it's true. Full stop. End of story. Why that fascinates me so much is that he is not doing that to like seem radically cool. He's not doing that to be like, I'm just like, I want to be called a Siddiq, I want this title of being the most truthful one. And likewise, he's also not doing it from a sense of, he's not motivated by a sense of, this is going to seem so awkward, I'm going to seem so like stupid, people are going to perceive me as being so like, and that's in a society where they believe in God anyway. So no, it's not, there are certain beliefs you can hold. But what it makes me think in the context of visibility versus being unseen is that I just think it's a kind of time where we have to fight really hard against all of these times, basically, that I think are antithetical to Islam. I think that, yeah, you're right, we are visible, but we're not seen. And I think that's the difficult thing. It's like we only visible as security threats. We're only visible as criminals or like risks. And so for me, I don't know, and I don't really believe that there's a way that we can kind of re-narrate our visibility. I don't know the way we can co-opt it, because you can't really, the security state is so huge and these narratives are so big. The Palestinians, we're seeing them, everyone's seeing this genocide, but it's not leading to the justice that's been promised comes with visibility. It's not, and if you think about it, that is the promise that those particularly early social media posts were coming from, is this promise that if we show you our humanity, if we excavate for you our realities, and if we film it and we put it on video and we put it on screens, you will deliver justice that is promised to those who are witness. But that's not the reality that we're living in. And so, yeah, I guess for me, like, I don't know about navigating, but I think the conclusion or the kind of place I find myself at is just trying to find the balance, I suppose, between using visibility strategically. Okay, you are in the world, you're going to have to be there. What are you going to do with the fact that you're seen? But knowing, and I remember, a friend once said this to me, that, and I think it's an Islamic kind of aphorism, but that nothing you do publicly will count for you. And so actually really not having that much hope in my public deeds, not having that much hope in your, like even this book or whatnot, it's like, Allahu Alam if it's done more bad than good on my scale, right? Like, inshallah, it's, beneficial to people, but Allahu Alam, you really can't know until, the veils are lifted and it's too late to change it. But I think practicing more being unseen is a big thing. Like, and we all know it has health benefits in terms of being off our social media, being wherever, like those things. I mean, just yesterday, a teacher shared a really interesting quote. I believe it's from Imam Shafi'i, and it was that when you feel like speaking, be silent, and when you feel like being silent, speak. And the part I think makes more sense, in the sense that, if you want to speak, it's probably the nafs, right? Like, I want to say something, I want to be silent. But the idea that actually also, and I think this is maybe where the balance comes in, where being silent, speak. And what he was getting at here is that usually when we feel like being silent, that's also the nafs, because I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to say that actually for my religion, I can't do that, or I don't do that, or actually the way I see it, that's not okay. And so that's also the nafs, right? We don't want to be awkward, uncomfortable. And so I think I kind of actually took that to be like, oh, that's the balance we're trying to strike, right? Is like, cases you're still fighting the same enemy, which is yourself, but it just looks so maybe under the security state what that looks like is that, you know what, I'm going to wear my hijab and I'm not going to like, I'm going to face certain risks and stuff, but I know that Allah will be my protector under under a different circumstance. I don't know, like you're now at home and you're alone and it's the middle of the night and your prayers, well, you don't need to tweet about that, you know, like that's now don't tweet, right? Like that was the time to tweet maybe this. And so maybe it's something like that, finding that balance between. But I think, yeah, for me, it's also just about constantly navigation, is constantly outrunning my own nafs, constantly trying to, you know, I think the ego has a real way of convincing you that you're, no, this is really good. Like, this is really sincere, actually, what you're doing. And the intentions are really, really good here. And I think just having to constantly be like, That's kind of what the book is if you've read it. It's like me going like, I've said this, but then is that true? Myself is saying this, but is that real? So I think that's the thing. We're not just having the navigation of that. We're like on all these different planes at the same time, trying to navigate seen and unseen, visible, invisible, and all these different things. So it's, yeah, not easy.
Yeah, I mean that saying that you just shared from Imam Shafi about when you want to be silent, actually speak. It's reminded me of what we were talking about earlier about speaking around Palestine.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes when I see if I see like some pro-Zionist content, for example, there'll be a part of me that will want to speak, even though I know at the back of my mind there is no point in me contributing to this conversation because it's just there's better things for me to do with my time, and also you just know that it's not going to achieve anything. And sometimes you just want to do it so that you have the last word, but it's not the best use of your energy. And actually, there can be something very harmful about what you're bringing into your world. Like, you don't need to bring everything into your world. You need to allow everything in. But also, you know how we're getting tired.
Yeah.
And we're feeling like, as I said before, like we're running out of what to say. Not that we don't necessarily want to say, but we don't know what to say anymore. And I think actually at those times when we are feeling so exhausted, that's the time that we need to keep going. If we're collectively feeling exhausted, and I'm sure because we're all going through the same timeline, if we all quieten down, then there's going to be silence, and we cannot have any more silence around what's going on.
Yeah. I think there is something as well, a really interesting connection between being seen and being heard. And this is something that's come up in conversations I've had around the book as well. Like, I think we often only feel heard when we feel seen. Like they kind of go hand in hand, which is interesting because it kind of means there is some connection between the words I say, the expression of my inner, and you seeing my outer. Like we kind of want almost a matchup. And so I think there's totally something there in the sense that, you know, actually whilst we're witnessing a genocide, the only real way to, I suppose, the least we can do is to articulate something about that, express something. And at the same time, I think not have all our hopes on that. And I don't believe that the Palestinians have all their hopes on our witnessing, you know? So it's like, again, the balance of kind of, so, because then there's two relationships, right? Because it's like knowing that God witnesses us witnessing. Sometimes, you know, it's like, I feel like, you know, in the example you've given about posts or whatever, sometimes I think there's also that impetus of, just so someone says something, just so there's a comment that it shows that we didn't allow this. And I was saying to you earlier, you know, I sometimes feel like a lot of what we do is just for the historical record, just let it not be said that, and even, you know, on Yom Al-Qiyamah, let it not be said that, you know, these Pharaohs, nobody stood up to them. Let it not be said that nobody said anything. And I also understand that we all have different roles, right? Because I think that's another tricky thing is that, you know, and sometimes I think that hadith is often really misattributed, actually. I recently learned that, you know, the one that says, if you can't change it with your if you see it as a bad happening, then the first thing is change it with your hand. If you can't change it with your hand, then change it with your tongue. If you can't change it with your tongue, change it with your heart. But I recently learned that, you know, actually the meaning behind this hadith is that there's different. The hand is actually meaning the people who control the state power, those who have the monopoly of power, right? And actually, the only ones who can do something with the hand, they're not in this situation, right? That would have been the Muslim states, if they exist, if we kind of claim that they exist. You know, like this genocide would never have happened in the times of, you know, the righteous caliphs, you know, I'm sure there would have been however,
Exactly, yeah.
and then the tongue referring to actually the ulama, that is the responsibility of those who speak, who know, have the knowledge to match, to speak out in terms of, say, this, you know, this is munkar, this has crossed the boundaries now, right? This is like not okay. Asked us, or I at least speak for myself, the lay people, really, and I think this situation shows it to us. We don't have the state apparatus, we don't have the ilm, we don't have the power to kind of persuade rulers. What we do have is the hearts, and so I suppose at that level, it's also a thing of knowing that God witnesses my status, knows that maybe I'm not someone who can move states, but I am someone who can. You know, one of my teachers was asking, well, you know yourself, dua for Palestine? You know, are you not? And God knows. And I think that was quite sobering, because it was like, actually, am I going more to protest than I am, like, have I, you know, am I, because there's the secular world things you can do, sure, but actually, are you matching it up with the things that will weigh on your scales differently? And so I think that it is really important to, yeah, just have that balance again, always with these things in those conversations. I feel like I maybe went on a tangent from what I was actually responding to.
No, but that actually leads on to something else I was thinking about when you were talking earlier as well, about are we, although we are being shown what's happening in Palestine, but are we really seeing them? Are we really hearing them? And I say that because I feel like the Palestinian liberation movement, like the activist movement, you know, I remember, like, you know, I've been on protests where there are, you know, the takbirs are being shouted and there are chants in Arabic and there are du'as being made. And there is, at the same time, there's this call that's like, oh, no, but you shouldn't do that because this has to be an inclusive space. We have to understand that there's people of all backgrounds and all faiths here. And what I feel is happening actually is we're taking what's happening in Palestine and we're stripping it of its Muslim identity and its Muslim soul.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if we really hear it, the people of Palestine are speaking Arabic because that's their language, and Arabic that is the language of the Quran, right? But they are, not only are they speaking Arabic, but they are speaking spiritually. They are making dua, they are saying Alhamdulillah, they are Allahu Akbar, they are calling on Allah. They're not just calling on the people of the West or the people of the world, they are calling on their Lord, on our Lord. But when we talk about the situation, when it's spoken about in activist circles or spoken about in the media, it is addressed as a humanitarian issue. Yes, there is a humanitarian element of it for sure. But I think there is something so actually harmful in removing the fact that these are Muslims and these are people that are calling on God. And okay, there are people in Palestine that are not Muslim for sure. There are Christians and Jews and other groups and maybe people growing up in Muslim families that are no longer by their own choice not Muslim. But overwhelmingly, they are Muslim. And actually it feels like another way that we're erasing Muslim identity. And, you know, I mean, I do it myself. Like, I remember there was a time when, you know, we'll think about hijab, not just as being God's command, but I'm doing it, you know, for the male gaze, or I'm doing it as modesty, and we don't allow ourselves to really just say, actually, I'm doing this because God has asked me to do it and because I believe. And it's the same with fasting. We fast to feel the plight of the poor. Well, yeah, maybe that's true, but actually we fast because it's been decreed by Allah, end of story. All the other things are a bonus, right? But there is something, and to see it happening with Palestine increasingly, especially when what we see from the other side is, you know, sheer Islamophobia in how the Palestinian liberation movement and activists are being spoken about. It feels so disjointed and actually really harmful. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I completely agree with you. I just think it's something I've also really like thought about, especially I think earlier on in the genocide, where it's just like it's really jarring that, like you say, the language that's being used actually by the people in Palestine is not the language that's being used in the protest. And I think I remember being at a protest and there was like some sort of, you know, socialist workers party or whatever it was, and they were like, you know, what is needed is something like an Arab socialist union or something. And I just thought that's so out of touch with what no one's calling for that. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that's emblematic of like what every person, I'm just saying there is a way in which you can come to this cause over people, but then as you say, completely just project onto it your own kind of imaginary. And I think, again, the language of shaheeds, of even though now it is being translated as martyrs, I think that doesn't really capture what we're talking about when we're talking about shaheeds. And I've seen people try and talk about this more in terms of like, what is it, you're essentially witnessing that the way that I died was under tyranny and under injustice, and I've witnessed but I think there is also something about, sometimes I just think about it in a more like visual way, in the sense that there's the way that we're seeing like these videos, but then there's a whole Philistine we're not seeing, right? Like, and I think, you wonder about all the angels, the density of the air with angels, and you wonder about kind of the nur, right? Like, we're seeing darkness, but what we're not seeing, we don't know like all of the light, and thinking about all of the just like, the masjid. Like, I saw a picture just this morning of a mosque that's been completely bombed out, and they're still praying in Jamaat in the shell of it. But just thinking about, subhanAllah, like, we don't even know, the dhikr that the ground is doing, or the witnessing that the trees and the stones and all of these things. And so I think sometimes when I think of it like that, like, here's a visual, but then here, there's again, like, if the veils are to be lifted for us, if we were to see this as it really is, it's going to be so different to what we think we're seeing. And so, I'm totally with you. I think there's also the element that when you listen, like, I don't know if Palestinians are asking for the West. They're not putting their hopes on the West in the way that I think we often are, in terms of why aren't Western states intervening. The most I've heard them say is, where are the Muslims? Where are the Arabs? Like, they know their hopes don't lie with the Western occupying forces, and even with the Muslim states, really what they're saying is they're decrying them and denouncing them and saying, well, what do you call this, like, Islam, if we're not here? And the most thing I've heard people say is, we have Allah, all we have is Allah, and we have Allah, and that is enough for us. And I think if the fact that isn't really filtered through into these kind of academic conversations or political activist conversations is, I think it's quite worrying. But I think also, like you pointed out, is something we have to, I think, continuously remind ourselves of, so we don't end up doing that, because I think that's an even greater injustice if, as Muslims, we're still doing that. But I think it's like you say, it's not just, this is just an issue, I think, that clarifies it, but we see it across the board with all sorts of things, the ways that whether it's sanitizing, whether it's like whatever you want to call it, but it's a secular lens, and this is really what the whole book is about. A secular lens can never capture our reality, and we'll then be brave enough to step outside of it and be who we're asked to be by God, because I don't think you can be who God's asking us to be under a secular gaze. Because even like, for me, there's a huge unspoken obvious thing in all of these Palestinian conversations, which is, this is where, and you can't say it because of the security state, but it's like the reality of armed jihad has a necessity, and you can see why, and I can see why, and you can barely say that sentence without kind of like, I feel already like, like any kind of way to laugh that off or something. But that's because, and that kind of is, I think that's the crux of what does it mean to be visible but unseen. That I can't even use the language of my God that has ordained that actually you have a responsibility to struggle in arms or in situations like this. Well, to say, because it's like, well, now you're a threat, now you're a risk, now you're under the TACT, and like, so it's like these really do bring to a head, like, then what? Because really, what I guess what I'm saying with that is the consequences. Well, then what does that allow? What then is a real possibility for us to do in a situation like this? So this is a moment of real decisive truth. Can we, or can we not, help our siblings who are being murdered? It looks like we can't. And so we can't, like, wow, I think that really tells you the impact then of having just taken all of this in. We're mobilized, and I think we're mobilized by not just those gazes, but I think what I tried to look at in the first book, in the chapter I mentioned, was that how those gazes have also us from our own knowledge. And I think really that's another element of this book, is that is ilm, knowledge, like Islamic knowledge, is something that we don't have access to, because more of us, and I quote from Yasser Morsi in my other book, that he has this beautiful quote where he says, I realized at some point I spoke more fluently the language of the war on terror than I did the language of the Quran. And I think that look, we're a bunch of Muslims, and again, I'm saying we, but maybe I should speak more for myself, but I do believe it's true for other people, that we speak more fluently the language of being racialized than we do the language of what Allah, and I think that's where you go, do you know what, this is why we're not the ummah that we could be right now. And there's that hadith, I'm sure many people have heard it at this moment or in these last few months, but about the Sahaba say, the Prophet ﷺ says there's a time when the Muslims are going to, from all sides, are being attacked, and they say, but how is it because there's so few of us? And he ﷺ says, no, there's many, but they're like the foam on the ocean. And that image has stuck with me too, that it's just lately that like just nothingness. There's so many of us, billions, but like just we have no power, we have no strength. And I think that obviously we know that's from Allah as well. That's that's something that is wisdom in that too. And I think that's also, again, that balance, right? That it's not just to despair and kind of berate ourselves, but to say, okay, let's take action then. Let's equip ourselves with knowledge. Let's equip ourselves with what we can. We maybe can't overturn states overnight, but what we can do is maybe build a generation, inshallah, who are better Muslims than us, perhaps, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. We're just going to take a small break here to talk about the sponsors of today's show, Muslim Charity. Since 1999, driven by Islamic faith and values, Muslim Charity have been delivering life-changing projects for communities living in poverty. They work with honesty, integrity, and determination, supporting some of the world's most under-recognized, vulnerable, and isolated communities. As well as providing quality aid and support during emergencies and disasters, they focus on long-term development of families and communities looking to bring an end to hunger, thirst, and poverty. They work with groups of people often marginalised, including the homeless community in the UK, children born in brothels, street children, children and adults with disabilities, the elderly, and orphans. To find out more about their amazing work, visit muslimcharity.org.uk/Samia and see some of my favourite projects, especially as you consider where to give your precious zakat and sadaqah this Ramadan. And I think that kind of call or that encouragement to take the time to work on ourselves spiritually, to improve our connection with the Quran, to that question, like, are we actually making dua for Palestine? Are we taking the time every day sincerely to sit and speak to God about it? Or is it, I have on many a day uttered an Ameen under my breath as I scroll past something on social media, or uttered a small prayer, but I know that that's not nearly enough. I know that I cannot turn to Allah and say, I ask this of you, because I'm not sincerely asking. And we know Allah says, you ask and I will give, but are we actually asking? Are we allowing ourselves to truly believe that this is powerful enough, that dua is powerful enough? Or are we just too obsessed with the fact that we need to operate within these systems, and we're spending more time, as you said before, like spending more time protesting? And there is space for that, and there is the need for that for sure. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things, but at the same time, to really sort of own our own Muslim identity and work on it, and to understand that there is great power and strength in that. And until we do that, as a community and as an ummah, we're not, as you said, we're not going to get to the point that we need to be in a position where we can help.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think an example that's just come to mind that I think is really another kind of challenging one, I suppose, but it's just like, obviously a lot of us feel, or perhaps not the two of us because we're freelancers, but I think many people feel that if I speak up, my job is at risk, my these things are at stake. But I guess there is also a question and a challenge there in terms of, but did we ever think that our jobs and our risk and our money and all of that was because of us? And I think the underlying premise of those fears is that we do, despite as much as we believe that Allah, does provide everything, at some level we still go, yeah, but I keep my job because I'm, quiet, or I keep my job because I'm a good worker. And I think that's another way in which I've been thinking a lot about, like, BDS and people speaking up and being silent and all of these things. But really, they all rely on these lies, these falsities, that your employer is your Lord. Your institution is your God. And I think, again, I know it's easy for me to say because I'm not, employed by someone, but I do think there is a way in which you can kind of see those, you can see your own reality, right? It's just a mirror for yourself, but it's for yourself to go, oh my gosh, do I believe that? Whether or not I say something or I don't, Allah will give me the meant to have. Tomorrow, whether I have a job or not, Allah will give me the exact wealth meant to have. And I think, again, it's things that we can purport we believe, but then when push comes to shove, I came across a story of a scholar who he says he says to another, like a higher scholar, he's like, I want to kind of become, like you. And he says, okay, great. First, just go give away all your wealth. And he was like,
Mm.
immediately, that's like the heart. It's like, oh my God, get rid of all my wealth. Like, how am I going to? But, I think they're the
Mm.
moments where you kind of go, actually, oh, am I who I'm saying I am? Do I believe what I think I believe? And I think these moments are helpful in kind of helping us go, who is our Lord? Is it, because that's something I explore in the book, is it whiteness? Is whiteness our God? Is it
Mm.
secularism? Is it other Muslims? Is it like, I just want to say the right thing so other Muslims think I'm a good Muslim? And I think that's where you feel that real battle with yourself, where it's like, if I just do it for God, what would that look like? If I really want, like, if I just was to obey God in this moment, that becomes like, I think that's the real challenge then, where it's like, oh, you're seeing yourself for yourself. And that's probably the worst and hardest thing, seeing yourself for yourself. Very difficult.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, if I was in a position where I genuinely felt like I could lose my job, do
Yeah,
I have that
exactly.
real faith that it will be okay? In like, maybe I believe it will be okay eventually for
Right,
sure.
right.
But do I believe it will be okay
Yeah,
tomorrow or today in the
yeah,
evening? I can't say with
yeah.
conviction, and that like I feel a bit disgusted with
No, I
myself
get you.
saying that, but like, because that's a really harsh
Yeah,
reality to like say openly and believe that.
yeah.
But I believe that God is the provider of
Mm.
everything, and that he will provide for me also. But at the same time, I'm just like, but what if he? Because I also know that. But what if God feels like, but I'm going to provide for you tomorrow. I'm not going to provide for you
Yeah, yeah,
today. Because at the end of the day, you also know that that is also, God's plan. You don't know what God's
yeah.
plan is, and it's
But,
very
but I think
yeah.
and I think it just speaks to the fact that, because I think you often you only see the opposite, right? So like, we're not, the
Mm,
inverse would be, I believe I'm secure because of me. Like, like,
mm,
I think my house isn't being bombed because do you know what I mean? Something in me that's good, that's allowed me to be not in Palestine and here. But in fact, and again, that's where it's like, but the inverse is probably true. Like, they're filling up Jannah probably. And I sometimes think, like, somehow,
exactly.
like, judgment, will I be anywhere, if I am to make it to Jannah, inshallah, how would I even be, we talk about the heights. You can see all the believers who are going to be filling the top ranks, the top tiers. How will
Yeah.
we even be close to
Yeah.
Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when, like, and yeah, subhanAllah, man, I think, yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to escape the epistemology of the secular, and it's a difficult thing to, we think we don't live in times of jahiliyyah and idolatry. I mean, I guess maybe we do, but I think we don't, because idolatry doesn't look how we expected it to look. There's not
Mm.
idols outside the Kaaba, but what there is like idols in our hearts, I guess, and
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important as well. Like, it is a struggle, and maybe it's something that will take a lot of inward work or a lot of time, or I don't know what. But to make yourself aware of it, I think is an important first step, and to sit with how uncomfortable it is, and then to make dua about it, because to turn to Allah and say, Allah, I know this, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm not fully comfortable with it, but I'm telling you, and I'm turning to you, and help me, guide
yeah,
me. And if I'm not able to do this thing, but I know that I should do it, then you do something and make it happen for me, because we know that happens. Like, I know somebody who at one point wasn't was just realized that her employer was holding these really harmful views about Palestine, and she was like, I know I should leave my job.
mm,
I know I should, but I don't feel like I can,
mm,
because I'm the sole breadwinner, and I have X, Y, and Z to pay. And if I lose my job, she was like, I just don't know if that's a risk that I can
mm,
take. And I was like, you need to make your intention, and you leave it to Allah.
mm,
I kid you not. So, Hema, I think within like a week, she was made redundant.
subhanallah.
I was
Mm.
like, you were not moving, God moved you.
Yeah, that's
God
amazing.
moved you. God took you out of there. And there is so much goodness in that.
Yeah,
And obviously, like, I think in that situation, it just meant that she had a little bit of time to figure it
yeah,
out, to find another job. And like, and I really feel that, like, she knew, or like, we know that there's certain things that we need to do, and sometimes we can't do it.
yeah,
But, and if we can tell Allah that I just need your
yeah,
help.
yeah,
Just help me get there, help me get there. And I think, that's what like even istikhara is
yeah,
about. It's like, show me the way, help me understand what I should be doing. And if I can't do it for myself, you can do anything.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's
And to
beautiful.
have faith in that.
That's beautiful. I remember even when I was writing the book, and some points, like I said, I really struggle with intention, like my own intention. And I remember at one point coming across a really obvious idea that I hadn't thought of, which was just, if you're not sure, then just ask Allah for the right intention.
Yeah.
You know what the right intention. Give me that intention. I'm not sure. I can't tell. I can't. Because they say that you can't even know really your own intention with things you do. And so I was just like, well, do you know what? Instead of just worrying myself sick, I'm just going to say, Allah, and better. And I think that sometimes again we forget when we're saying God is all powerful. When we're saying God is, we kind of forget that. Okay, well then you can actually ask God to just take over. If if I say I have to Allah, I'm relying on you, God, then actually rely on God. But yeah, these are all, I guess, these are all that constantly undercutting yourself, I suppose.
Yeah. One of the chapters in the book, I never thought I would see this written in a book. I think it's reading Surah Kahf in Las Vegas.
On the Las Vegas Strip, yeah.
The Las Vegas Strip. And it's funny because I'm sure you weren't sat anywhere inappropriate, but I had this image of you just sat in like the corner of a casino reading.
Right, but I mean, it's hard to escape them there. But yeah, no.
Like that's the image that came that came to my mind, and I found it really funny, but I was just like, well, trying to show. But yeah, I think that was one of my favorite sections of the book. And you talk about the idea of the caves, and you talk about Plato's caves, and you also comment on Imam al-Ghazali's commentary on that. And I wonder if you could just take a moment just to talk a little bit about what you were thinking about when you think about caves.
Yeah.
And how to escape the cave, because essentially the conclusion you draw and the conclusion that comes from Surah Al-Kahf as well is that the cave is not forever. It's not the place to stay. But yeah, just
become obsessed basically with this cave metaphor. So initially what I'm thinking about is Surah Kahf, obviously. Basically I'm just talking about being sick of being seen and unseen, and sometimes all I want is to escape to a cave. And I was thinking about, obviously, and that's a huge thing. The Prophet ﷺ had this cave, the cave of Hira, that he would go to regularly prior to prophecy, even to just be in seclusion with Allah. And likewise, to this day, many people pursuing a spiritual path, they will go take to khalwa in a cave, or in something very similar, where it's just kind of this radical isolation where you're alone with God. The thought of caves, I was reminded of my undergraduate degree and looking at Plato, and Plato's got this cave, obviously, that is quite famous in Western, I suppose, thought. And his whole metaphor around the cave is that he basically talks about the fact that most people are essentially duped by the fact that he talks about a group of people being chained in a cave, and they're looking at the wall of the cave, and they're only seeing the shadow of things that are being people outside the cave moving past the cave with things. And because that's all they see and they don't know any different, they assume the shadow is the reality of things. And so what he's trying to say is that actually the reality is out there, and majority of people are not kind of open to this. They're not kind of thinking critically enough to understand this. And if they were only to unbind themselves from their fetters and turn around, they'd see, oh my God, I've been in a cave the whole time. There's actually natural light. I thought that darkness and shadow was all that there was. And so I mean, it's very like abridged version. But what Imam Ghazali says, or what I've come across as a commentary he makes on this, is that, well, that's just the dunya. Like the cave is the dunya, and you can never really escape the cave until death. And that's really the lifting of the veils. It's not like, oh, you can escape the cave and now you're in the dunya, and now you have the true understanding of reality. His thing is, no, that's literally what the dunya is. It's just a shadow of things. And we don't really understand beyond it. And so I just got really interested in this, and I'm sure there's more philosophical like takes and commentaries, but my kind of thinking on it was almost like, this whole representational politics that we get drawn into is essentially like looking at shadow puppets of ourselves that we're then kind of we're being asked to compete over and say like, oh no, like, I want it to look more like that, or like, oh, that one doesn't quite capture my features correctly, like I need it to be a bit more like this. While we're in a cave and we're not even in the reality of things, we're ignoring the reality of things, which is, like we've talked about the rest of the podcast, that, the epistemology of Islam, But also something I was thinking about was there's a fire burning here. Like there is the light that's being cast is coming from a fire, and this fire, you know, in the context we're living is a burning fire of colonial capitalist tyranny that, because we're being distracted to the shadows that it's casting, we're seeing the root causes. And, you know, that really like aligned to, I suppose, my analysis of structural violence in general, which is that we are often misdirected to these solutions that have nothing to do with the root causes. So there's a fire burning. Oh no, don't worry about the fire. But how does the puppet look? Is it like matching your, you know? And likewise, like, you know, having conversations about the root causes of colonial occupation or Zionism's history or British Empire, in fact, in making the Israeli state. Instead, all we're allowed to talk about is like, can you say free Palestine or not? Can you say river to sea, or can you, is that, you know? And so I think me, the cave became like really emblematic of like this trap that I feel that we're in psychologically, where we're not even allowed to grapple with the real like interesting knowledge and the interesting thoughts. I also think that also led me to conclude is that like we are trapped in this cave. Like I don't know that we can escape it. And so is there a way to be in the cave in form that like, yeah, I'm here in body, but actually in spirit, in that unseen realm between you and God, you know, and you say to God, like, this is just a cave and I'm not fixated on the shadow. And, you know, even if I can't put out the fire, I know that this is just a fire of the dunya. This is just, there is a real fire that I'm trying to avoid. And therefore, you know, there's like some way in which I think that can our psyches. But I think for me, the main thing was like, let us not be diverted to these debates that have nothing to do with our well-being or our ability to live or even our ability to escape the cave. And, you know, I think that idea of escaping the cave is just a really powerful one in the sense that I think at times like now, you know, we're all feeling crazy, like you're kind of like being gaslit, like globally, you know, it's like, how do I escape this? And you kind of can't. And it reminds me of, across this idea that, you know, the reason that we need sleep is that the ruh, the soul, is actually an alien, it's an extraterrestrial being in this realm, right? We're not made for this realm. And so you need to sleep for the soul to be able to go back to where it came from, just for a brief period, just to be able to have some respite from the dunya. And so in a way, like, you know, the cave it is unbearable to be in it. In some ways, like being in this world is unbearable. But if you find it unbearable, I think there's a kind of a hope in there that, alhamdulillah, because they say that the dunya as a sijin is a prison for the believer. And so actually it's good hope and good sign that, you know, inshallah, we are believers when we find the dunya to be a prison. But if we're loving being in the cave and we're like, oh my God, I love the shadow and I want to be, I want to have a better, then, you know, Alhamdulillah, maybe that's a sign that actually kind of self-reflect a little bit and wonder like, is that, because I think it's always about, for me, think about like, is this the highest horizon? Is this the highest offer that I can be offered? And like I said about myself, like, oh, why am I thinking that the best thing I can possibly achieve is to see myself for myself? And so, yeah, the conclusion I landed was, let me just close my eyes, forget the shadows, forget the cave, like just be in the cave. I'm here, but like in my heart and in my mind, I'm elsewhere. I think the difficulty is then, you know, allowing that to interact with others, right? You know, the Prophet ﷺ is our example. We must be loving beings. We must be kind. And, you know, he was someone who's not attached to the dunya at all. And yet every single person that he met felt that they were the most important person. You felt that really like you care about me so deeply. So I think we have the example of how to live that life where you're in the cave, but you're not of the cave. I guess that. Again, like none of the conclusions of this book are new at all. I'm basically just saying, as a deeply ignorant person who's been deprived of and perhaps alienated from my own understanding of Islam, really, because I've met people and it's actually really beautiful. Who've said, and I remember a mother came up to me at the end of one of the book launches and she said, not to sound rude or anything, but like my daughters really didn't resonate with this book at all. And I was like, all right, yeah, like, you know, tell me more. And she was like, yeah, they were just like, well, you know, duh, like I don't get it. Like, why did she need to go on such a, you know, like what is this whole thing of, like whiteness? And like, alhamdulillah, do you know what? Like that's so heartening to me that there are young people growing up who are just like, I don't get it. Like what? Of course Allah is Allah and I believe Allah, and why would I be apologetic about being Muslim? So I am also of good hope that, you know, people are actually not all in this position, and there are many people who would be like, yeah, duh, like of course this is obvious. You then, you know, as a listener, then inshallah that, you know, you just in a better place than me, you come to faster conclusions than me, but a lot of us are in that cave. So if we're in the cave, then shout out.
I think so too. And I also think like there's, you know, a lot of times where we know things like objectively or intellectually or like spiritually, like we know them, but we don't feel them, or like we're not practicing them, or we're not living them. Like, you know, we know, yeah, Allah's the provider of all, but of everything, but are we actually living with that principle and with that understanding? Like, you know, that's what I guess like the test of faith, or like the struggle of exactly how we're living our lives right now really comes down to. And I think that, yeah, I'm also really hopeful. I think, the generation that we are, where a lot of our parents were immigrants, coming from different parts of the world. We grew up, I think, with a lot more angst about fitting in and our identity. And I think, the Gen Z,
Yeah,
one of the things I really
alhamdulillah.
like about them is they're just so unapologetic about who they are.
Yeah,
And I really hope that we see more of
yeah,
that, and that more people are able to find, just not feel so angsty about our identity. And I think, unfortunately, what you write about Entangled in Terror is the reason that angst actually comes from the system, and the capitalist system, and the pro-war, and the all of that kind of terror. And until that goes away, I think there will always be some form of angst. But because we have been speaking for a really long time, but just to end, you talk about, in the book, you talk a lot about your grandmother and your trip to Pakistan, and your sort of obsession with documenting small details. And your grandmother was just like, "What are you doing, you weirdo?" But also she kind of said well, if you just ask me, I'll tell you. And I think that also goes, you talk at the start of the book, you build the scene where you're sat in this room and there's boxes and boxes of white IKEA boxes around you, you kind of have this image of you just being surrounded by all these boxes, and you're not willing to part with things. And these are your notebooks from over time, but then you also, there's receipts and postcards and all these kind of things that you're just not willing to get rid of. And I think I was really fascinated because my husband complains all the time about me hoarding. And so I really resonate with that. I resonate with this side, but I don't want to get rid of these things, because what if I forget? What if I forget? What if I forget that this thing happened? And I've been trying to make a conscious effort of deleting photos off my phone, because my memory's getting full up. I don't have a choice, but it's a really it's a really difficult thing to do. But I feel like there's something really deep there with you're not willing to part with not just your own writing, but different things that, memories and mementos and things that have happened. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you think that really tells us and tells you about yourself and where you come from, and also maybe even with your grandmother and what she has been through in life?
I think there's so much contained in just that very simple act of kind of quote unquote hoarding. But I guess it's something I only really noticed like I said, genuinely that is in my room at home. There's just all these IKEA boxes, and it is a bit like, this is a bit ridiculous. You've got 20 IKEA boxes. Like, what are you going to do with all of this? That's the kind of the crux of the question. What is it all for, right? And I think, like you said, well, what if I forget? Or my mum is, I guess, similar to me, and her thing is just oh, no, it's, it's meaningful. Like, I can't get rid of it. It's too hard to part with. And I think for me, it's also like, well, these are records of things. And I think the beginning of my kind of curiosity around it was like, okay, well, maybe it's because I'm really interested in history, and I'm interested in archives and records. So maybe there's a way in which I want to have a record of my own. But actually, that begins to take on more significance when you think about the fact that of our own parents or even our grandparents, they don't really exist in the sense that actually this came from the fact that when I was doing my undergrad, I ended up doing a really big historical project around women of my grandma's generation. And I was told I had to go to the archive. You have to go to the archive. And I was like, I will, but there's not going to be anything there. And I did. And everything I found in the archive, local, national, was all deeply racist, because it was written by sociologists, it was written by anthropologists, it was written by people who wrote about them. It wasn't from them. And likewise, they'd had to leave, the majority of their life somewhere else overseas. They come here. And then really, because, they're immigrants and they're not, generally hadn't been that wealthy, they moved from house. I think my mum moved from, there's 8 different houses that they had initially moved between, because you're just, you're flitting between whatever's affordable financially and whatnot. And so really this idea of having things you can hold on to, it wasn't that. And there's not many things. And, even when there's so many things that my grandparents just had to get rid of, moving house now, so now I get rid of that stuff. So I'm of the opinion that a lot of this is psychologically a response to that kind of generational trauma that we've lost. There are no records. And if you go deeper in history, actually colonialism deliberately actively erased the roots of colonialism. And so, I talk about Operation Legacy, which was this deliberate British Empire project, which was to an order given to the colonial command center in each country to destroy by either burning or drowning all of the records that document what has happened under British colonialism. So we need to account that there's been a really concerted, violent effort to erase our histories and our existences, therefore. Actually, then suddenly, and maybe it's convenient for me, but like suddenly hoarding becomes, I think, a kind of resistance to that erasure, but also psychologically and emotionally, I think a kind of a kind of natural instinct, I think, that you're going to do that if you've been robbed of knowledge of yourself, because ultimately it's just knowledge of myself, right? It's like, oh, like you said, oh well, I went here, oh, I might forget that in 2001 I did this thing, or like, and there's things in the like school certificates and all these things. And in reality, actually, what's fascinating is when you do go to archives and you come across like these aristocrats who all of their stuff is in these archives. Recently I've been working with the John Rylands Library in Manchester, and it's got a lot of aristocratic things. Those things are in there for them, like they'll have the things that, it seems silly to hoard, like your university certificate or your school book or whatever, but they'll have those things, their journals and all of these things. And so then it raises the question, well, who decides who's worth remembering and who's not? And why are we preserving and archiving the, personal items of these people just because they're rich? Because they could afford to, because they had the money to give their names and give their items, give their possessions. So all of that is part of it. And at the same time, I do hold still, again, going back to balance, I do hold the awareness that all of this will go, all of this will turn to dust. Actually, I've been, like I said, I've been working with archives lately, and something I've been thinking about is, I wouldn't even want it's not that I want these things to go into an archive. I don't want to join these kind of very white secular institutions wherein, only certain people get remembered and certain people are forgotten, and it's all about what you have. Because actually, we know that it's not about what you hold physically. And we actually know that, like the things that are on our record are not just things that are physically there. So there is an ambivalence, but I think you're justified to hoard is basically what I'm saying. And I think that there's much history there, that because I've spoken to so many people and so many people have said that bit of the book really resonate with them, that, oh my God, I keep all these things, and oh my God, I hold on to these things. And I don't think it's a coincidence that across the board, diasporic folk are doing this. I think there is a real trauma there that maybe we'll never speak of, and maybe we'll never know of fully, but just absolute loss. And then added to that, loss of memory, right? Like, I think that the fact that there's so much trauma in the bodies of our elders, they often will not be, they will be, and I believe it is emotional, kind of physiological thing, repress, suppress, and not remember things as they were, because that's how you survive. You have time to remember all of these violences. And so I think it's also, in the face of all of that, then to have, a box full of a few things that recount what you did is actually like historically a significant thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially like even now in Gaza, like we are seeing the targeting of archives, like literally physically, like records are being bombed and attacked, and everything is going. Libraries are being attacked, and these are not just like cultural institutions; they physically hold memory and history, and they are being attacked. And this is part of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and it's happening. It's happening right in front of us, and that there's something really frightening about that. On the surface, you're like, well, it's a building full of paper, but actually, like, it's lives, it's generations of people, and it's history. Because what I think I'm also worried about is that in years to come, the history books that are going to write about it are going to tell a narrative, and obviously, like, they're already dictated and directed by so many agendas, but if there's no sources to counteract that, it's pretty scary, because when I'm gone, or when you're gone and the activists are gone, if we're not leaving behind, and even like people like me, like I don't have any I don't have any primary sources. I can't tell you the intricacies of what's going on, whereas like the things that are being lost potentially could. And so, yeah, that's also really, I think about that a lot. I think about like, like I'm only going to be here for a few number of days, but there will be, inshallah, like there may be, God knows what's going to happen to the world, but there may be generations and generations after me, and what will they know about what happened today? Let alone what will they think about like what I did or what I didn't do, but what will they know about what even happened in general? And how can we make sure that like that the truth, or like the truth as we know it and we understand it, is what is carried forward?
And again, I think that is like, just to contradict everything I've said, I also think there's an ambivalence here in the sense that we also know that Allah will ensure that what is meant to remain on earth will remain. And so I think that's something I often think about, is that actually I can hoard all this stuff and then, A'udhu Billah, but it could all just burn away. Like, literally, it's just paper, that's just stuff. And so I think also remembering that if it's meant to stay, it will stay, and if it's not meant to, it's not. And likewise, you could amass massive libraries, you could mass whatever, and in an instant Allah can just drown them, can just whatever. And so I think, me, that's probably another invitation where I go to myself, but are you relying on God? Like, is this a moment of, because you want your, and also kind of remembering, when we think of legacy, when we think about things that we leave behind, there's only 3 things that we believe are worth leaving behind, and that's someone who can pray for you when you're not here. And really, that's actually, when we realize that when we're gone, we don't believe we're gone, we believe we could still got a little chance to amass some good, or forgiveness. And then worthwhile knowledge, like something that was actually from the Prophet that you've passed on, and likewise, maybe a sadaqah jariyah, some sort of well or something, whatever. So that also makes me think, actually, my boxes, do they fit into that Allahu A'lam? Maybe there's some things in there that are, could contribute, but sometimes, again, it's me getting wrapped up in again, a kind of secular version of legacy, because even thinking about the fact that we come from oral cultures, so some of this is not just the fact of deconstruction, which absolutely is, but some of it is just actually we have come from oral culture, so it's been okay that there isn't books and physical things, because actually people have their histories in their names, like some cultures, I know, like in Somalia, you have such a long name because your grandpa and your grandpa and your grandpa, blah, blah, blah. And likewise, there'll be poems and songs and all sorts of things that carry these histories actually in a way that a box doesn't really. But sometimes I guess I think again has disrupted that sequence as well, though. So I think that's why we kind of suffer from that doubly so. But I guess it is just a curiosity and an invitation I ask of myself, in terms of like, actually though, like, what would it mean for those boxes to go? It opens the fact that I think trying to just have, again, the cave thing where it's like, don't be too attached to them, they're just boxes in a cave. But at the time, I suppose, when we see what's happened, like you're saying, Gaza, knowing that this is really the least of our concerns, in terms of like, it's such a privilege to be able to hoard any of my own things and to have 20 IKEA boxes, subhanAllah, to have one. I mean, I remember, sorry, it's a complete tangent, but it is related. I watched the Grenfell play, and the way that they depicted a lot of things, it was all done with the survivors of the fire, which was really beautiful. But each character had a box, and that's because each survivor only got a box. They said, we don't have time to bring everyone's things from what's left of their rooms, but we can just give everyone a box. And then there's also significance around boxes, I feel, in terms of like one box of your stuff could be the world. And likewise, 20 boxes I've got can just feel like not enough. And so it says something about power and privilege and all those things again. And
yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Suhaiymah, for your time today and sharing just all your thoughts. I really hope more people pick up seeing for ourselves, but honestly, it was such an honor and a privilege speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for having me on, and yes, for just listening to all my ramblings. Really appreciate it. And Jazakallah khair. Lovely to be on again as a second time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf podcast on your chosen podcast platform, and follow, like, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the show. Also, come find me on social media. I'd love to connect. Today's episode was brought to you by Muslim Charity, a faith-based international charity working around the world to tackle poverty, hunger, and thirst. They deliver your zakat and sadaqah with honesty and transparency, reaching those in need with impactful projects all year round. Muslim charity provide vulnerable communities with life-saving healthcare, clean water, food, livelihood opportunities, and education, helping everyone to thrive. If you're looking for a charity you can trust, especially when it comes to your zakat and sadaqah, Muslim Charity is the one for you. Visit muslimcharity.org.uk/Samia to check out some of my favourite impactful projects. That's muslimcharity.org.uk/Samia, SAMIA.